The rain hammered against the windshield with such force that Sarah Mitchell could barely see the road ahead. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. And beside her, in the passenger seat, her daughter Emma sat silent, eyes fixed on the water streaming down the glass. In the back, 7-year-old Lucas had fallen asleep, his head tilted against the window, breath fogging the cold surface. The wipers scraped across the windshield in a desperate rhythm that matched the pounding in Sarah's chest. She had $12 left in her bank account. $12 between her children and the street. The eviction notice had been taped to their apartment door 3 days ago, the final warning printed in red letters that seemed to burn into her vision every time she closed her eyes. 28 days past due. Now vacate immediately. Failure to comply will result in legal action. The words had stripped away the last shred of dignity she had been clinging to since David left. Since he had walked out with his secretary, leaving Sarah with 2 children, a mountain of debt he had secretly accumulated, and a job at a grocery store that paid just enough to make her ineligible for assistance, but nowhere near enough to actually survive. She had tried everything. Borrowed from friends until their patience wore thin and their voices grew cold when she called. Applied for loans that were rejected before the ink dried on the applications. Worked double shifts until her manager told her she looked like death and sent her home. She had sold everything of value, the wedding ring, her grandmother's necklace, the television, the furniture, until their apartment echoed with emptiness. And then, in the thick fog of desperation, she had seen the auction notice. County foreclosure auction. Mansion. Asses. No reserve. Her hands had trembled as she read the description. Historic estate. Severe fire damage. Condemned. Not habitable. No utilities. Buyer assumes all liability. Every rational part of her brain screamed that it was madness. But Sarah had learned that rationality was a luxury for people who had choices. She had $900, her last paycheck, meant for groceries and gas, and the storage unit where their few remaining possessions sat gathering dust. $900 that could buy them maybe 2 more weeks of desperation, or it could buy them something else. Something that terrified her even as it pulled her forward. A roof. Land. A chance. The auction had been held in a fluorescent-lit room that smelled of mildew and old coffee. She had sat in the back, Emma clutching her hand, while men in suits shuffled papers and spoke in bored monotones. When they announced the mansion, laughter rippled through the small crowd. Someone called it the Death Trap on Ashford Hill. Another joked about ghosts and insurance nightmares. Sarah had raised her paddle with a hand that shook so badly she thought everyone could see her bones rattling. $900. The auctioneer had looked at her as though she had lost her mind, but when no one else bid, when the room fell into an uncomfortable silence broken only by more laughter, he brought the gavel down with a crack that sounded like a door slamming shut on her old life. Now, 3 hours later, she was driving toward that door, toward a property she had never seen, except in the grainy photographs attached to the auction listing. Emma finally broke the silence, her voice small and uncertain. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to sound confident, strong, like the mother her daughter needed her to be, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "We don't have anywhere else to go, sweetheart. This is all we have now." Emma's face crumpled, and Sarah felt the knife twist deeper in her chest. Her daughter was 14, old enough to understand what desperation looked like, old enough to know that this was not an adventure, but a freefall. Sarah turned her eyes back to the road, blinking against the tears that blurred her vision worse than the rain. The GPS announced their arrival with a cheerful chime that felt obscene. Sarah slowed the car, peering through the downpour at the structure emerging from the gloom. For a moment, she thought they had the wrong address. But then she saw the rusted gate hanging crooked on its hinges, the stone pillars crumbling like rotted teeth, and she knew with a sinking certainty that this was it. The mansion loomed against the storm-dark sky like a carcass, its windows shattered and gaping. Its roof collapsed in places to reveal charred rafters reaching upward like skeletal fingers. The front facade, once grand, was streaked with soot and scarred by flames that had devoured whole sections of the structure. Vines crawled up the walls, choking what remained of the stone, and the grounds surrounding the house were a jungle of overgrown weeds and toppled statuary. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Mom, we can't live here. We can't." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to turn the car around, to drive until the gas ran out, to wake up and discover this was all some terrible nightmare. But Lucas stirred in the back seat, his eyes fluttering open. And when he looked out the window at the ruin before them, he said in a voice full of wonder, "It looks like a castle." The innocence of it shattered something inside Sarah. She killed the engine and sat in the silence, rain drumming on the roof, her children's frightened breathing the only sound in the world. This was what she had bought with her last $900. This was the roof she had promised them. A condemned wreck that looked like it would collapse if the wind blew too hard. But it was theirs, and they had nowhere else to go. She pushed open the car door and stepped into the rain, cold water soaking through her jacket instantly. Emma followed reluctantly, and Sarah lifted Lucas out of the back seat, his small arms wrapping around her neck. Together, the three of them stood in the driveway, staring up at the mansion that seemed to leer back at them with broken windows like hollow eyes. The front door hung ajar, one hinge broken, and Sarah pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the interior like a groan of protest. The smell hit her first, char and rot and dampness so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. The entryway stretched before them, grand even in its decay. A staircase swept upward, its banister scorched black. Several steps collapsed entirely. The walls were blistered and peeling, water stains spreading like bruises across the plaster. "This is insane," Emma said, her voice rising. "Mom, this is insane! We can't stay here. It's not safe. It's not even a house anymore. It's a ruin." Sarah set Lucas down and walked deeper inside, her footsteps echoing on the warped floorboards. Rooms branched off the main hall, each more destroyed than the last. Furniture lay in charred heaps. Ceilings sagged where water had pooled. In one room, she found the remnants of a chandelier, its crystal pieces scattered across the floor like broken stars. But she also saw things the auction listing had not mentioned: the bones of the structure, thick stone walls that had withstood the fire, high ceilings that spoke of grandeur, fireplaces carved from marble, cracked but intact. This had been a beautiful home once, a place where people had lived and loved and built a life. Sarah returned to the entryway where Emma stood with her arms crossed, tears streaming down her face. Lucas had wandered to a window, pressing his nose against the filthy glass, watching the rain. Sarah knelt in front of her daughter and took her hands. "I know this looks terrible," she said quietly. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we have a roof, Emma. We have walls. We have land. It's more than we had this morning." Emma shook her head, voice breaking. "You spent our last money on this. What are we going to eat? Where are we going to sleep? There's no power, no water, nothing." Sarah swallowed hard. "Tomorrow I'll figure out the utilities. I'll find a way. Tonight we have the car. We have blankets. We have each other." She pulled Emma into her arms, feeling her daughter's thin frame shake with sobs. Over Emma's shoulder, Sarah stared at the ruined hall and wondered if she had finally gone too far. If this was the breaking point where hope turned to madness. Lucas's voice cut through the moment. "Mom, there's a man outside." Sarah's head snapped up. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw a figure standing by the gate, arms crossed, watching the house. A moment later, another car pulled into the long driveway, headlights cutting through the gloom. Then another. Within minutes, 3 vehicles were parked outside, and people were stepping out into the rain, their faces curious and amused. Sarah recognized one of them immediately. Richard Mitchell, David's brother, dressed in an expensive coat, so his expression a mixture of pity and contempt. Beside him stood David himself, his arm around the woman he had left Sarah for, both of them staring at the mansion with open mockery. Her stomach turned to ice. She walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch, which groaned ominously under her weight. Richard was the first to speak, his voice carrying over the rain. "Sarah, my God, David told me you'd done something stupid. But this is beyond belief." David stepped forward, shaking his head. "You bought this? With what money?" "The last money I had," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound strong. "The money you left us with after you emptied our accounts." David's face darkened, but Richard laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "So you threw it away on this death trap? Sarah, even for you, this is pathetic. You can't possibly think you can live here." From one of the other cars, a woman Sarah vaguely recognized emerged. It was Diane, David's mother, her face pinched with disgust. "I told you she'd drag those children down with her," she said to David. "Look at this place. It's not fit for rats, let alone my grandchildren." Sarah felt her hands ball into fists, nails digging into her palms. Lucas stood behind her now, clutching the back of her jacket, and Emma had emerged as well, her face pale and streaked with tears. "What are you all doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice low and dangerous. Richard smirked. "Word travels fast in a small town, Sarah. You made quite the spectacle at that auction. People talk. And when they heard that David Mitchell's ex-wife bought the condemned mansion for pocket change, well, we had to see it for ourselves." David stepped closer, his expression softening into something worse than anger. "Pity." "Sarah, this is over. You can't do this. You need to let us take the kids. They deserve better than this." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Over my dead body." Diane's voice cut through the rain like a blade. "You're unfit. Look at this place. No sane judge would let you keep them here." The words landed like blows, and Sarah felt the walls closing in. She had known this might happen, had feared it every day since David left, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that tore her apart. Emma moved forward, her voice shaking but fierce. "We're staying with Mom. You don't get to decide." Richard laughed again. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't understand. Your mother just made the worst decision of her life. This place isn't a home, it's a graveyard. And when it collapses on you in the middle of the night, you'll wish you'd listened." Sarah's vision blurred with rage and fear. She wanted to scream, to shove them all off her property, to collapse onto the broken porch and weep. But Lucas's small hand slipped into hers, squeezing tight, and she felt something harden inside her. She straightened her shoulders and met Richard's eyes. "This is my property. You're trespassing. Get off my land." Richard raised his eyebrows, then turned to David with a grin. "She's lost it completely. Come on, let's go. There's no saving someone this far gone." They retreated to their cars, still laughing, still shaking their heads. David lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting Sarah's, and she saw something there she couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or just the discomfort of witnessing someone else's destruction. Then he turned and left, the red tail lights of his car disappearing into the rain. When the silence returned, Sarah stood on the porch with her children, staring at the empty driveway. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the evening light was fading fast. Emma leaned against her, and Lucas pressed close on the other side, and together they stood in the shadow of the mansion that was now their only refuge. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry." Emma's voice was small but steady. "It's okay, Mom. We're together. That's what matters." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. They had nothing. No money, no plan, no certainty that they would survive the week. But they had each other. And they had this broken, ruined place that no one else wanted. As darkness fell, when they carried blankets and pillows from the car and made a nest in the least damaged room they could find, Sarah used the last of her phone battery to call the utility company, begging them to turn on the water by tomorrow, promising payment she didn't have. When the call ended, she sat with her children huddled close, the cold seeping through the walls, and tried not to think about how badly she had failed them. Lucas fell asleep first, his breathing soft and even. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Mom," she whispered, "do you really think we can fix this place?" Sarah wanted to lie, to tell her daughter that everything would be fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "I don't know, Emma. I really don't know, but I'm going to try." Emma nodded, then closed her eyes. Sarah stayed awake long into the night, listening to the house groan and settle around them, the wind rattling through broken windows, the rain dripping through cracks in the roof. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its voice mournful and lonely. She thought of Richard's laughter, of David's pity, of Diane's disgust. She thought of the eviction notice and the empty bank account and the $900 she had gambled on a ruin. And she thought of her children, sleeping beside her, trusting her to somehow make this work. In the darkness, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would not let them take her children. She would not let this place defeat her. Whatever it took, she would find a way to turn this wreck into a home, even if it killed her. The morning light was unforgiving. It crept through the shattered windows and exposed every crack, every stain, every inch of devastation that the night had hidden in shadow. Sarah woke with her back aching from sleeping on the hard floor, her breath visible in the cold air. Emma and Lucas still slept, curled together under a pile of blankets, and Sarah rose carefully, not wanting to wake them. She walked through the mansion in the pale dawn, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Each room told a story of destruction. The kitchen was a blackened shell, the stove a twisted ruin, the cabinets hanging open like broken jaws. The dining room's table had collapsed in the center, its legs charred to stumps. Upstairs, she found bedrooms with ceilings caved in, wallpaper peeling away in long strips, floors so rotted she was afraid to step on them. But she also found things that gave her pause. In one room, a fireplace mantel carved with intricate designs. In another, a window frame with stained glass still intact, the morning light casting colored shadows on the floor. The staircase, despite its damage, was made of solid oak, and she could see where craftsmanship had once made it beautiful. This had been someone's dream once. Someone had built this place with care and pride, had lived here, had raised a family within these walls. And then something had gone terribly wrong. The fire had consumed it, and whoever had owned it had walked away, leaving it to rot. Sarah descended the stairs carefully, testing each step before trusting her weight to it. When she reached the ground floor, she heard voices outside. Her heart sank. They were back. She stepped onto the porch and saw not David's family this time, but neighbors. A woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a bun stood at the edge of the property, arms crossed, shaking her head. Beside her, a man in overalls pointed at the roof, saying something Sarah couldn't hear. Two younger women stood near the gate, phones out, taking pictures. The older woman noticed Sarah and called out, her voice sharp. "You're the one who bought this place." Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. The woman walked closer, her expression a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "I'm Margaret Holt. I've lived on this hill for 40 years, and I'm telling you right now, you've made a terrible mistake. This house has been condemned for a reason. It's not safe. You can't live here, especially not with children." Sarah's throat tightened. "I don't have a choice." Margaret's face softened slightly, but her words remained firm. "There's always a choice, dear. And this is the wrong one." The man in overalls spoke up. "I'm Tom. I work construction. I saw the auction listing for this place and laughed. Nobody in their right mind would touch it. The foundation's cracked, the roof's gone, and half the structure is ready to collapse. You'd need hundreds of thousands to make it livable. Maybe more." Sarah felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up her neck. "I know it's bad, but I have to try." One of the younger women, still filming with her phone, called out, "This is going to go viral. Single mom buys death trap mansion. It's like a horror movie waiting to happen." Laughter echoed from the small group, and Sarah felt the sting of it deep in her chest. She wanted to retreat inside, to hide from their judgment, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "This is my property. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." Margaret sighed. "Suit yourself. But don't say we didn't warn you when the whole thing comes down on your head." They left, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Word would spread. The whole town would know about the desperate woman who threw away her last dollars on a ruin. She would become a cautionary tale, a punchline, a tragedy in the making. When she turned back inside, Emma was standing in the doorway, her face pale. "I heard them. They're right, aren't they? This place is going to kill us." Sarah walked to her daughter and took her hands. "We're not going to let it. We're going to make this work." "How, Mom?" Emma's voice cracked. "We don't have money. We don't have tools. We don't even have food." Sarah's mind raced. She had thought about this all night, turning over every possibility. "I'll find work. There's a hardware store in town. I'll ask if they're hiring. I'll do anything. And we'll fix this place one piece at a time." Emma shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You can't fix this. It's too broken." Sarah pulled her into a tight embrace. "So am I," she whispered. "So are we. But we're still here. We're still fighting. That has to count for something." Lucas appeared, rubbing his eyes, his voice sleepy. "I'm hungry." The words hit Sarah like a punch. She had no food, no money, nothing to give him. She forced a smile. "Let's go into town. We'll figure it out." They piled into the car, and Sarah drove down the hill toward the small town of Ashford. The streets were quiet, lined with modest homes and small businesses. She pulled into the parking lot of a diner, her stomach twisting with anxiety. Inside, she approached the counter and asked the waitress if they had any day-old food she could buy at a discount. The waitress, a woman named Carol with kind eyes, looked at Sarah for a long moment, then glanced at Emma and Lucas sitting in the booth. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with 2 plates of eggs, toast, and bacon. "On the house," she said quietly. "You look like you could use it." Sarah's eyes burned with tears. "Thank you. I'll pay you back. I promise." Carol waved her off. "Just take care of those kids." While Emma and Lucas ate, Sarah asked Carol about work. The diner wasn't hiring, but Carol mentioned the hardware store down the street. "Owner's name is Bill. Tell him I sent you." Sarah thanked her again and left the diner with a fragile thread of hope. She walked to the hardware store, a small building with peeling paint and a faded sign. Inside, an older man with a grizzled beard stood behind the counter, sorting through invoices. "Are you Bill?" Sarah asked. He looked up, his expression guarded. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Carol from the diner said you might be hiring." Bill studied her for a long moment. "You're the one who bought the mansion on the hill." Sarah's heart sank. Word really did travel fast. "Yes." Bill shook his head slowly. "That place is a money pit. You got scammed, lady." "I know what it looks like," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for work. I'm a hard worker. I'll do anything." Bill leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "I don't need full-time help, but I could use someone for inventory, stocking shelves, cleaning, part-time, minimum wage." It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll take it." Bill nodded. "Start tomorrow." 6 a.m. Sarah left the store feeling a flicker of relief. It was a small step, but it was forward. She returned to the diner, where Emma and Lucas had finished eating, and they drove back to the mansion. The afternoon was spent exploring the grounds. Sarah wanted to know every inch of the property, to understand what they were dealing with. The land stretched farther than she had realized, acres of overgrown forest and tangled brush. At the back of the property, she found the remains of a garden, stone pathways buried under weeds, a fountain cracked and dry. Lucas ran ahead, his energy renewed by the meal, and Emma followed more slowly, her expression still guarded. Sarah walked the perimeter, noting the fences that had collapsed, the outbuildings that leaned precariously, the remnants of a greenhouse with shattered glass panels. And then she saw it. Near the far edge of the property, half hidden by ivy and brush, a stone structure jutted from the ground. It looked like a mausoleum or a root cellar, its entrance sealed with a rusted iron door. Sarah approached it slowly, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't explain. Emma came up beside her. "What is that?" "I don't know," Sarah said quietly. She reached out and touched the door, the metal cold and rough under her fingers. The lock was old, corroded, but when she pulled, it didn't budge. Lucas tugged at her jacket. "Can we open it?" "Not today," Sarah said, though she felt a strange pull, a curiosity that gnawed at her. "Tomorrow. We'll find tools and come back." That night, they slept in the same room again, the cold pressing in around them. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind circling back to the stone structure in the woods. She told herself it was probably nothing, an old storage shed, a forgotten remnant of the estate. But something about it nagged at her, a whisper at the edge of her thoughts. What if it wasn't nothing? What if there was something inside? She shook her head, forcing the thought away. She couldn't afford to hope for miracles. Hope was a luxury, and she had already spent it all. But as sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with locked doors and shadows that beckoned her forward, promising secrets she didn't yet dare to believe. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn and left Emma and Lucas sleeping. She drove to the hardware store and began her first shift, stocking shelves and sweeping floors. Bill barely spoke to her, but he watched her work with a critical eye, and when her shift ended, he handed her $50 cash. "This'll get you through a couple days," he said gruffly. "Come back tomorrow." Sarah returned to the mansion with groceries and a sense of fragile accomplishment. She cooked a simple meal on a camping stove she had found in the car, and they ate together in the fading light. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah stood on the porch and looked out over the land. The mansion loomed behind her, broken and scarred, a monument to failure in the eyes of everyone who saw it. But it was hers, and no one, not David, not Richard, not the neighbors who laughed, could take that away from her. She thought again of the stone structure in the woods, the locked door, the strange pull she had felt. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow, she would find out what lay beneath. And deep in the quiet of the night, as the wind whispered through the broken windows and the house settled around them, Sarah felt the faintest stirring of something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The days that followed took on a rhythm born of necessity. Sarah woke before dawn each morning, drove to the hardware store, and worked until her hands ached and her back throbbed. Bill said little, but he began leaving small tasks for her that came with a few extra dollars. Repair the display, organize the back room, Each evening she returned to the mansion with groceries and the fierce determination to make it through one more day. Emma had begun to help in ways that broke Sarah's heart and filled it at the same time. Her daughter, who should have been worrying about school dances and homework, instead spent her afternoons clearing debris from the rooms, sweeping floors, and trying to make corners of the house livable. Lucas, too young to understand the full weight of their situation, treated the mansion like an adventure, exploring the grounds with a stick as his sword, declaring himself king of the ruins. The town's judgment followed them everywhere. At the grocery store, Sarah felt eyes on her, heard whispers behind her back. The woman who bought the death trap. Poor thing's lost her mind. Those children should be taken away. She kept her head down, paid for her food with the carefully counted bills from her dwindling wages, and left as quickly as she could. One afternoon, as she was leaving the store, she nearly collided with a woman in an expensive coat. The woman looked her up and down with barely concealed disgust and said loudly to her companion, "Can you imagine? Living in that wreck with children? It's criminal, really." Sarah's face burned, but she said nothing. What could she say? The woman wasn't wrong. The mansion was barely standing. But it was all they had. That evening, when Sarah pulled into the long driveway, she found another car already parked outside. Her stomach dropped. A woman in a crisp suit stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, peering through the broken windows. When she saw Sarah, she walked forward with an expression that was professional, but not unkind. "Ms. Mitchell? I'm Jennifer Ross from Child Protective Services. We received a report about the living conditions here." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Emma, who had been sitting on the porch steps, stood quickly, her face draining of color. Lucas ran to Sarah's side and grabbed her hand. "A report," Sarah repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer's eyes swept over the mansion, taking in the shattered windows, the sagging roof, the charred walls. "I need to inspect the interior and speak with you about your situation. This is standard procedure when concerns are raised about child welfare." Sarah wanted to scream, to demand who had called, though she already knew. David. Or Richard. Or Diane. It didn't matter which one. They had promised to take her children, and now they were making good on that threat. "Of course," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Please, come in." She led Jennifer through the mansion, watching the woman's expression grow more grave with each room. The kitchen with no working stove, the bedrooms with no furniture, the bathroom with no running water yet, despite Sarah's desperate calls to the utility company. Jennifer made notes on her clipboard, her pen scratching in the silence. "Where do the children sleep?" Jennifer asked. Sarah led her to the one room they had managed to make somewhat habitable. Blankets spread on the floor, pillows arranged in a makeshift bed, a camping lantern for light. It looked exactly as terrible as it was. Jennifer knelt down and examined the space, then stood and faced Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you're in a difficult situation, but this house is not safe for children. There's no heat, no proper facilities, structural damage throughout. I'm required to file a report recommending temporary removal of the children until you can provide adequate housing." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her knees weaken, felt the room spin around her. "No, please. I'm working. I'm fixing it. Just give me more time." Jennifer's expression softened, and for a moment, Sarah saw genuine sympathy there. "I can see you're trying, but my job is to protect these children. The court will make the final decision, but I have to recommend what I believe is in their best interest." Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking but fierce. "We want to stay with our mom. You can't take us away." Jennifer looked at Emma for a long moment, or then back at Sarah. "The hearing is set for next week. I suggest you find alternative housing before then, or at the very least, make significant improvements to this property. Otherwise, the court may grant temporary custody to another family member." David, Sarah thought bitterly. They would give her children to David, the man who had abandoned them, who had left them with nothing. The injustice of it made her want to collapse. After Jennifer left, Sarah sat on the porch steps with Emma and Lucas on either side of her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and in any other circumstance, it might have been beautiful. But all Sarah could feel was the crushing weight of defeat. "We're not going to let them take us," Emma said quietly. "We'll run away if we have to." Sarah pulled her daughter close. "We're not running. We're going to fight." That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Sarah sat alone in the dark and let herself cry. She had tried so hard, had given everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. The mansion loomed around her, a monument to her failure, and she didn't know how to fix it. She didn't know how to save them. When the tears finally stopped, she wiped her face and stood. Her eyes fell on the camping lantern, and she picked it up, feeling its weight in her hand. She thought of the stone structure in the woods, the locked door she had promised to investigate. She had been putting it off, too exhausted each night to do anything but collapse. But now, with 1 week until the hearing, with everything on the line, she needed to do something. She needed to know what was behind that door. When Sarah grabbed a crowbar from the car, one of the few tools she had, and walked into the night. The moon was bright enough to light her path, and she followed the overgrown trails toward the back of the property. The woods were silent except for the rustle of wind through the leaves and the distant call of an owl. When she reached the stone structure, it looked even more imposing in the moonlight. The ivy had grown thick over the years, nearly obscuring the entrance, but the iron door was still visible, sealed tight. Sarah set down the lantern and examined the lock. It was old, rusted through in places, but still holding firm. She wedged the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame and pulled with all her strength. Nothing. She tried again, bracing her foot against the stone, muscles straining. The metal groaned but didn't give. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Come on." She repositioned the crowbar and threw her weight against it, and this time she felt something shift. The lock screeched, metal grinding against metal, and with a final heave, it broke free. The door swung open with a sound like a sigh, and a rush of cold air poured out from the darkness below. Sarah grabbed the lantern and held it up, peering into the opening. Stone steps led downward, disappearing into shadow. Her heart hammered in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, to close the door and walk away. But she had come this far, and she needed to know. She descended the steps slowly, testing each one before trusting her weight to it. The air grew colder as she went deeper, and the smell of earth and age filled her nostrils. The walls were stone, some smooth and carefully constructed, and after a dozen steps, the passage opened into a chamber. Sarah raised the lantern higher, and her breath caught in her throat. The chamber was larger than she had expected, the ceiling arched and supported by thick pillars. but it was what filled the chamber that made her freeze. Wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked against the walls. Old trunks with brass fittings. Shelves lined with objects she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Her hands trembled as she approached the nearest crate. The wood was old but solid, and when she set down the lantern and pried at the lid, it came free with a crack. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, were items that gleamed even in the low light. She pulled one out carefully, unwrapping the fabric, and found herself holding a silver candlestick, ornate and heavy, some tarnished with age, but unmistakably valuable. Sarah's heart began to race. She opened another crate and found china plates, delicate and painted with gold trim. Another held crystal glasses, each one packed carefully in straw. She moved to a trunk and opened it, and inside were linens, embroidered with initials she didn't recognize, and beneath them, jewelry boxes. Her fingers shook as she opened one, and in the lantern light, she saw necklaces, bracelets, rings, all glittering with stones that caught the light. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies. She lifted one necklace, the weight of it substantial, and held it up to the light. The gems sparkled like trapped fire. "This isn't real," she whispered to herself. "This can't be real." But it was. She was standing in an underground vault filled with treasures, hidden beneath the ruined mansion she had bought for $900. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who had owned this? Why had it been left behind? How had no one known it was here? She moved deeper into the chamber, opening more crates, finding more wonders. Paintings wrapped in protective cloth, books bound in leather, silver serving dishes, a collection of coins in small velvet bags that clinked softly when she lifted them. And then, at the very back, she found something that made her stop. A metal box, smaller than the others, with a lock that had rusted through. She pried it open and found documents inside. Deeds, letters, photographs. She pulled out one of the letters, the paper brittle with age, and held it close to the lantern to read. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, and as she read, a story began to unfold. The mansion had belonged to a family named Ashford, the same name as the town. They had been wealthy, prominent, the founders of the town itself. But scandal had destroyed them. The letter spoke of accusations, of betrayal, of a trial that had torn the family apart. Sarah found another document, a deed showing that the mansion had been seized by the court, the family's assets frozen. And then another letter, this one written in a desperate hand, speaking of hiding the family's most precious possessions before they could be taken, of sealing them away in the hope that one day, when the truth came to light, an heir might reclaim them. But that day had never come. The Ashford family had vanished from history, their name forgotten except as the label on a map, and their treasures had remained hidden, buried beneath the ruins of their home, waiting. Sarah sank down onto the cold stone floor, the letters scattered around her, and felt tears stream down her face. She had stumbled onto a fortune. Not a small fortune, but a vast one. The jewelry alone could be worth hundreds of thousands, maybe more. The paintings, the antiques, the coins, all of it together could be worth millions. She laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria, and covered her face with her hands. For so long, she had been drowning, fighting just to keep her head above water. And now this impossible miracle hidden in the ground beneath a house everyone had mocked her for buying. But even as the relief flooded through her, questions began to surface. What did she do now? Who did she tell? Could she even claim this legally? Or would someone come forward and take it from her? The thought of losing it after coming so close to salvation made her stomach turn. She gathered the letters carefully, placing them back in the metal box and stood. Her legs felt weak, her mind spinning, but she forced herself to move. She took one more look around the chamber, committing every detail to memory, then climbed the steps back to the surface. The night air felt sharp after the close atmosphere of the vault, and Sarah stood in the moonlight, breathing deeply, trying to steady herself. She closed the iron door and wedged it shut, then covered the entrance again with ivy, making it as inconspicuous as possible. No one could know. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. When she returned to the mansion, Emma was awake, sitting on the porch in her nightgown. "Mom? Where were you?" Sarah sat down beside her daughter and took her hand. "I found something, Emma. Something important." Emma looked at her with tired eyes. "What?" Sarah hesitated, then decided her daughter deserved the truth. "I found a vault, underground, at the back of the property. It's full of things. Valuable things." Emma's eyes widened. "What kind of things? Jewelry, antiques, paintings? Things that belonged to the family who built this house. They hid them before they lost everything, and they've been down there ever since." Emma stared at her, then at the mansion, then back at her mother. "Are you saying we're rich?" Sarah laughed softly, though her throat was tight. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. I don't know what it's worth or if we can even keep it. But it's there, and it might be enough to change everything." Emma threw her arms around Sarah, holding her tight, and Sarah felt her daughter's tears against her neck. "We're going to be okay," Emma whispered. "We're going to be okay." Sarah held her close and closed her eyes. She wanted to believe it, but she knew that the road ahead was far from certain. She had found a treasure, yes, but she had also found a new set of dangers. People would come for it. David's family, the town, maybe even the state. She would have to fight to keep it, and she didn't know if she had the strength, but she had to try. The next morning, Sarah left the children at the mansion with strict instructions not to leave the property. She drove into town with the metal box of documents hidden under a blanket in the back seat, and went to the only person she could think of who might help. Bill. She found him at the hardware store, restocking the paint aisle, and asked if they could speak privately. He led her to the cramped office in the back and gestured for her to sit. "What's this about?" he asked, his expression cautious. Sarah pulled out the documents and laid them on the desk. "I found these in the mansion, hidden in a vault underground. I need to know what they mean, legally. If what's in that vault is mine, or if someone else has a claim to it." Bill picked up one of the letters, his eyes scanning the faded text. He read in silence for several minutes, then set it down and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "Where did you say you found this?" "In a vault, at the back of the property. It was sealed, hidden under ivy. I don't think anyone's opened it in decades." Bill leaned back in his chair, with his fingers drumming on the desk. "You know what you found, don't you?" Sarah nodded. "A fortune. But I don't know if I can keep it." Bill was quiet for a long moment, then stood and walked to the window. "The Ashford family. My grandfather used to tell stories about them. They built this town, owned half the land around here. But there was a scandal, accusations of fraud, embezzlement. The patriarch was arrested, the family ruined. They say he died in prison, and the rest of the family disappeared. The mansion was sold off, passed through a dozen hands, until the fire destroyed it, and no one wanted it anymore." Sarah's heart sank. "So there could be heirs? People with a claim to it?" Bill shook his head slowly. "Not that I know of. The family line died out. No descendants, no relatives who ever came forward. If there were, they'd have claimed the property long ago. But you should talk to a lawyer. Make sure you're covered." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "Do you know anyone?" Bill pulled out a business card from his desk drawer and handed it to her. James Whitmore. He's handled estate disputes before. Tell him I sent you. He's honest, which is more than I can say for most lawyers. Sarah took the card, her hands trembling. Thank you. Bill met her eyes. You found something that could change your life, Sarah. But be careful. Once word gets out, people will come for it. People you trust and people you don't. Keep this quiet until you have legal protection. Sarah nodded, the weight of his words settling over her. She left the hardware store and drove to the address on the card, a small office above a bakery. James Whitmore turned out to be a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He listened as Sarah told him the story, showed him the documents, and explained her situation. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. This is remarkable and complicated. But from what you've shown me, the property is legally yours. You bought it at auction, free and clear. Anything on that property, including what's hidden beneath it, belongs to you under the law of treasure trove and property rights. Sarah felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. So I can keep it? James held up a hand. It's not quite that simple. If anyone comes forward claiming to be an heir to the Ashford family, they could challenge your ownership. But based on what I know, there are no living heirs. The family is extinct. The estate was liquidated decades ago. If they had wanted to reclaim their possessions, they would have done so by then. He paused, then continued. My advice is this. We file a claim with the court, establishing your ownership of the found property. We document everything, photograph it, catalog it, and get it appraised. Then we proceed carefully. If no one challenges the claim within the statutory period, it's yours, free and clear. Sarah leaned forward. How long? 90 days. 3 months. If no one comes forward in that time, you're safe. 3 months. Sarah could survive 3 months. She had survived worse. Okay, what do we do first? James stood and grabbed his coat. First, we go see this vault. I need to verify its contents and photograph everything for the legal record. Then, we bring in an appraiser. They drove to the mansion together, and Sarah led him through the woods to the stone structure. James examined the door, the steps, the chamber with a meticulous eye, taking notes and snapping photographs with his phone. When he saw the contents, his expression shifted from professional detachment to genuine awe. My God, he murmured, lifting one of the paintings carefully. This is extraordinary. He spent the next 2 hours cataloging everything, handling each item with care, making detailed notes. When he finally climbed back up the steps, his face was flushed with excitement. Sarah, this collection is worth a fortune. I'll need to bring in specialists to give you exact numbers. But based on what I've seen, we're talking about millions, possibly tens of millions. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She leaned against the stone wall, trying to process the words. Tens of millions. James placed a hand on her shoulder. I know it's overwhelming, but we need to move carefully. No one can know about this until the claim is filed and we have legal protection in place. Do you understand? Sarah nodded. I haven't told anyone except you and Bill. Good. Keep it that way. I'll start the paperwork immediately. In the meantime, keep the vault sealed. Don't move anything. And whatever you do, don't let anyone onto the property. Sarah walked him back to his car, her mind reeling. When he left, she stood in the driveway and stared at the mansion. It looked the same as it had yesterday. Broken, ruined, condemned. But beneath it, hidden in the earth, lay enough wealth to change her life forever. That evening, she gathered Emma and Lucas in the least damaged room and told them everything. And she explained about the vault, about the lawyer, about the 3 months they had to wait. Emma cried with relief, and Lucas, who didn't fully understand, simply hugged his mother tightly. But even as they celebrated, Sarah felt a shadow of fear. This was not over. In fact, it had only just begun. And she knew that when word got out, when people learned what she had found, the vultures would descend. She thought of David, of Richard, of Diane. She thought of the townspeople who had laughed at her, who had called her foolish, who had predicted her failure. Soon they would know the truth, and she didn't know if she was ready for what came next. That night, Sarah locked the doors and windows as much as the broken frames would allow, and lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling. She thought about the Ashford family, and about the scandal that had destroyed them, about the treasures they had hidden in the desperate hope that someone might one day reclaim them. In a way, she had. Not as an heir, but as someone who had stumbled into their legacy by accident. Someone who had bought their ruined home with her last dollars and found beneath it the answer to her prayers. She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." The next week moved in a blur. James filed the claim with the court, and appraisers began arriving at the mansion in unmarked cars, sworn to secrecy. They descended into the vault with equipment and notebooks, examining each item with expert eyes, and when they emerged, their expressions were grave with the weight of what they had seen. Sarah watched them work, her heart in her throat, waiting for someone to tell her it was all a mistake, that the treasures were worthless, that she had been foolish to hope. But each appraiser confirmed what James had said. The collection was extraordinary, rare, priceless in some cases. One painting alone, a portrait by a forgotten master, was valued at over $3 million. The jewelry, when laid out and examined piece by piece, totaled nearly $20 million. The antiques, the silver, the books, all added millions more. When the final appraisal came back, the total value was staggering: $312 million. Sarah sat in the lawyer's office and stared at the number on the page, unable to comprehend it. It was more money than she had ever imagined existing in one place, let alone belonging to her. It was enough to rebuild the mansion 100 times over, enough to secure her children's futures, enough to never worry about money again. James leaned forward, his voice serious. "This changes everything, Sarah. You're about to become one of the wealthiest people in the state. But you need to understand what that means. People will come for you. People who want a piece of this. Family, friends, strangers, the press. You need to be prepared." Sarah nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I know." James slid a document across the desk. "This is a confidentiality agreement. Everyone involved in the appraisal has signed one. We're doing everything we can to keep this quiet until the 90 days are up. But once that happens, once the claim is finalized, it will become public record. You won't be able to hide." Sarah signed the document, her signature shaky but firm. "I understand." When she left the office, the world outside looked the same as it always had. The same streets, the same shops, the same people walking past without a second glance. But Sarah felt as though she were moving through a dream, as though she had stepped into a parallel universe where the rules no longer applied. She drove back to the mansion, and when she pulled into the driveway, she saw Emma and Lucas playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. She sat in the car for a moment, watching them, and felt tears prick her eyes. They were safe. They were going to be okay. For the first time in so long, she could breathe. But as she stepped out of the car, she saw another vehicle approaching, and her heart sank. It was David's car, and behind it, Richard's SUV. They pulled into the driveway and parked, and when they got out, their faces were hard with purpose. Sarah walked toward them slowly, her stomach twisting. "What are you doing here?" David crossed his arms, his expression cold. "We heard you hired a lawyer. We want to know why." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "That's none of your business." Richard stepped forward, his voice sharp. "It is our business when it involves our niece and nephew. The CPS hearing is in 2 days, Sarah. If you're planning some kind of stunt to keep the kids, we deserve to know." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not pulling a stunt. I'm protecting my family." David's eyes narrowed. "From what? From us trying to give those kids a stable home?" Sarah's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You left us with nothing, David. You walked away and left me to drown. And now you want to take my children because I bought a house you think is worthless. Well, guess what? This house is worth more than you'll ever know." Richard laughed, the sound bitter. "A ruin is worth more than we know." "Sarah, you've really lost it." Sarah stared at them, her chest heaving, and for a moment, she almost told them. Almost threw the truth in their faces, just to see their expressions change. But James's words echoed in her mind. "Keep it quiet. Keep it safe." She forced herself to stay silent, to let them believe she was delusional, desperate, broken. Let them laugh. In 2 days, when the CPS hearing happened, she would have her answer. And in 90 days, when the claim was finalized, they would see just how wrong they had been. "Get off my property," she said quietly. David shook his head, disgust written across his face. Fine. We'll see you in court." They left, tires kicking up gravel, and Sarah stood in the driveway, trembling. Emma ran to her side, her face pale. "Mom, are they going to take us?" Sarah pulled her daughter close, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "No, sweetheart. I won't let them." That night, as Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, she thought about the vault beneath the house, about the fortune that would soon be hers, about the future that shimmered just out of reach. She had survived this long by refusing to give up, and she would survive what came next, no matter what it took. The treasure was hers, her children were hers, and no one, not David, not the court, not the entire world, would take them away. The morning of the CPS hearing arrived like a storm cloud, heavy and inevitable. Sarah woke before dawn. Her stomach twisted in knots so tight she could barely breathe. She had barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every terrible scenario where the judge looked at her broken mansion and her empty bank account and decided her children would be better off anywhere else. Emma and Lucas were staying with Carol from the diner, the only person in town who had shown Sarah genuine kindness without judgment. Carol had hugged her tightly the night before and whispered, "You're a good mother. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple dress she had bought years ago for job interviews that now hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight over the past weeks, the stress and labor wearing her down to angles and shadows. But when she looked at herself in the cracked mirror of the mansion's bathroom, she forced her shoulders back and lifted her chin. She was still standing. That had to count for something. James Whitmore met her at the courthouse, his expression serious but confident. He carried a briefcase that Sarah knew contained documents that could change everything, but they had agreed not to reveal the treasure unless absolutely necessary. The fewer people who knew, the better. "Are you ready?" James asked. Sarah nodded, though her hands were trembling. "As ready as I'll ever be." They entered the courtroom together, and Sarah's stomach dropped when she saw who was already seated. David sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. Beside David was Diane, her expression smug and satisfied. Richard sat in the gallery behind them, arms crossed, watching Sarah with barely concealed contempt. On the other side of the aisle sat Jennifer Ross from CPS, her clipboard thick with notes. and in the gallery, Sarah recognized several faces from town. Margaret Holt, the neighbor who had called her foolish. Tom, the construction worker who had laughed at the mansion. Even the woman from the grocery store who had called her criminal. They had come to watch her lose her children. Sarah took her seat beside James, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and a face that revealed nothing. She took her seat and looked down at the papers before her. This is a hearing regarding the petition filed by David Mitchell for emergency temporary custody of Emma Mitchell, age 14, and Lucas Mitchell, age 7. The court has reviewed the report from Child Protective Services. Ms. Ross, please summarize your findings. Jennifer Ross stood, her voice calm and professional. Your Honor, I conducted a home inspection of the property, where Ms. Sarah Mitchell is currently residing with her children. The property is a condemned mansion purchased at auction for $900. At the time of my inspection, the residence lacked running water, heat, adequate sleeping arrangements, and showed significant structural damage, including fire damage, collapsed ceilings, and unsafe flooring. Sarah felt each word like a blade. Everything Jennifer said was true, but stripped of context. It sounded like proof of her unfitness. Jennifer continued. Ms. Mitchell is employed part-time at minimum wage. Her financial resources are severely limited. While I observed that she is making efforts to improve the property, in my professional opinion, the current living conditions pose a risk to the children's health and safety. The judge turned to David's lawyer. Mr. Peterson, your statement. The lawyer stood, his voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned about his children. Ms. Mitchell's decision to purchase this dangerous property, with her last financial resources, demonstrates poor judgment and an inability to provide a stable environment. Mr. Mitchell has a steady income, a safe home, and the means to provide for the children's needs. He is seeking temporary custody until Mrs. Mitchell can demonstrate that she has secured appropriate housing. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but she forced them back. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The judge looked at James. Mr. Whitmore, does your client wish to respond? James stood, his voice steady and strong. Your Honor, my client is a devoted mother who has faced extraordinary hardship. She was left by her husband with no financial support, caring for 2 children on her own. Yes, she made an unconventional choice in purchasing the property, but she did so to keep a roof over her children's heads when facing eviction. She has secured employment and is actively working to improve the property. He paused, then continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell has reason to believe that her financial situation is about to change significantly. She has filed a legal claim regarding property found on her land, a claim that could substantially improve her circumstances. The judge raised an eyebrow. What kind of claim? James glanced at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, my client discovered a sealed vault on her property, containing items of significant historical and monetary value. We have filed a treasure trove claim with the court. The appraisal is ongoing, but preliminary estimates suggest the value is substantial. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. David's face went pale, and Richard leaned forward, his eyes wide with shock. Diane's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion. David's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate fabrication. Ms. Mitchell is inventing a treasure to avoid losing custody. James's voice was sharp. I can provide documentation, Your Honor. Photographs, appraisal reports, legal filings. This is not a fabrication. The judge held up a hand for silence. Mr. Whitmore, do you have these documents with you? James opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He approached the bench and handed it to the judge. Your Honor, these are preliminary appraisal reports from certified experts, photographs of the vault and its contents, and the legal claim filed with the probate court. The total estimated value is $312 million. The courtroom erupted. David stood, his voice rising. That's impossible. This is insane. The judge slammed her gavel. Order. Order in this court. Sarah sat frozen, her heart hammering, watching the judge flip through the documents. The woman's expression remained neutral, but Sarah saw her eyes widen slightly as she studied the photographs and appraisal figures. Finally, the judge looked up. Ms. Mitchell, is this documentation accurate? You discovered this vault on your property? Sarah stood, her voice shaking but clear. Yes, Your Honor. I found it by accident. It was sealed beneath a stone structure at the back of the property. I didn't know it was there when I bought the mansion. The judge studied her for a long moment. And you filed the appropriate legal claims? Yes, Your Honor. My lawyer is handling everything. The judge looked at Jennifer Ross. Ms. Ross, in light of this new information, do you wish to revise your recommendation? Jennifer stood, clearly caught off guard. Your Honor, I need time to review this information. If Ms. Mitchell's financial situation is about to improve as dramatically as suggested, that would obviously change my assessment. However, the current living conditions remain unsafe. The judge nodded slowly. Mr. Peterson, does your client wish to respond? David's lawyer was visibly flustered. Your Honor, we need time to investigate these claims. This is highly irregular. The judge set down the documents. Here is my ruling. I am postponing the custody decision for 90 days, pending the resolution of the treasure trove claim. During that time, the children will remain in their mother's custody under the following conditions. Ms. Mitchell must secure temporary housing with running water, heat, and safe sleeping arrangements. Ms. Ross will conduct weekly check-ins to ensure compliance. If at any point the conditions become unsafe, my custody will be immediately transferred. Do you understand, Ms. Mitchell? Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. The judge looked at David. Mr. Mitchell, if the treasure claim is validated and Miss Mitchell's circumstances improve, this court will revisit the custody arrangement. But for now, the children stay with their mother. She brought the gavel down with a sharp crack, and the courtroom dissolved into chaos. David was on his feet, shouting at his lawyer. Richard stormed out, his face red with fury. Diane sat frozen, her mouth hanging open in shock. Sarah turned to James, tears streaming down her face. We did it. We actually did it. James smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. You did it, Sarah. Now you just need to survive the next 90 days. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was immediately surrounded. Reporters had somehow gotten wind of the story and shoved microphones in her face, shouting questions. Is it true you found $300 million? How does it feel to go from poverty to wealth overnight? What will you do with the money? James shielded her, guiding her to his car while refusing to comment. But Sarah saw the faces in the crowd, the townspeople who had laughed at her. Margaret Holt, looking stunned. Tom, shaking his head in disbelief. The woman from the grocery store, her expression a mixture of shock and envy. As they drove away, Sarah looked back at the courthouse and felt something shift inside her. The mockery, the pity, the contempt she had endured, it had all been turned on its head in a single moment. But the victory felt hollow because she knew it wasn't over. James drove her to a hotel in the next town over, a place he had arranged for her and the children. It was modest, but clean, with 2 beds, a bathroom, and most importantly, heat and running water. Carol arrived shortly after with Emma and Lucas, and when the door closed behind them, Sarah collapsed onto the bed and wept. Emma and Lucas piled onto the bed beside her, holding her tight, and Sarah felt the tension that had been coiled inside her for months finally begin to unwind. "We're safe," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." The 90 days that followed were the strangest of Sarah's life. She continued working at the hardware store, partly because she needed the routine, partly because she refused to count on the treasure until it was legally hers. But everything had changed. The story had leaked, as James had warned it would. Within days, it was national news. Single mother discovers $312 million fortune in condemned mansion. The headlines were everywhere, and with them came the vultures. Strangers appeared at the hotel, claiming to be distant relatives, asking for money. Lawyers called, offering to represent her for a cut of the fortune. Investment advisors, financial planners, even celebrities reached out, wanting a piece of her story. James fielded them all, turning away the opportunists, protecting her from the chaos. But the worst were the people she knew. Richard showed up at the hotel one night, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Sarah, we need to talk. Family should stick together. Whatever's between you and David, that's the past. We can work together on this." Sarah stood in the doorway, blocking his entry. "You called me unfit. You tried to take my children. Now you want to be family?" Richard's face hardened. "You can't keep it all to yourself. There are legal claims. The Ashford estate. There might be heirs." "James has already researched it," Sarah said coldly. "There are no heirs. The family is extinct. The treasure is mine. Now get out before I call security." Richard left, but not before muttering threats about lawyers and lawsuits. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, shaking. Emma came to her side. "Are they all going to be like this?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Probably. But we'll get through it." The weeks crawled by. Jennifer Ross conducted her weekly visits, noting that the hotel met all safety requirements, that the children were attending school, that Sarah was maintaining employment. Each visit felt like a test, and Sarah passed them all. At the 60-day mark, James called with news. "The probate court has completed its review. No heirs have come forward. No challenges have been filed. In 30 days, the treasure will be legally yours." Sarah felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly knocked her over. 30 more days. She could survive 30 more days. But the pressure continued to mount. David filed an appeal, arguing that the treasure should be considered marital property, since the mansion had been purchased during their marriage, albeit after he left. James shot it down, pointing out that David had not only abandoned the family, but had actively tried to have Sarah declared unfit. The judge denied the appeal. Diane tried a different approach, showing up at the hotel with tears in her eyes, claiming she wanted to apologize, to make amends, but Sarah saw through it immediately and turned her away. Even the town shifted around her. People who had mocked her now smiled and waved when they saw her. Margaret Holt stopped by the hardware store to invite her to a garden club meeting, as if they had always been friends. Tom offered to help renovate the mansion for free, claiming he had always believed in her. Sarah was polite but distant. She remembered every sneer, every cruel word, every moment of judgment. Forgiveness would take time, if it came at all. On the 89th day, James called her to his office. "Tomorrow is the day. The court will finalize the claim at 9 a.m. Once that happens, the treasure is officially yours. We'll need to arrange for security, transportation to a secure facility, and begin the process of liquidation or preservation, depending on what you decide." Sarah sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking about that, about what I want to do." James nodded. "And?" "I want to restore the mansion," Sarah said quietly. I want to turn it into something beautiful again. It saved my life in a way. I want to save it too." James smiled. "That's a good plan. It will take time and money, but you'll have both." Sarah paused, then continued. "I also want to set up a fund for single parents in situations like mine, people who are one paycheck away from losing everything. I know what that feels like. I want to help them." James's expression softened. "That's admirable, Sarah. Really?" That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in the hotel bed, listening to Emma and Lucas breathing softly, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperation, the fear, and the moments when she had been so close to breaking. And she thought about the mansion, that broken, beautiful place that everyone had called a ruin. They had been wrong about the mansion, about her. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully, choosing a new outfit James had helped her buy, a simple but elegant suit that made her feel strong. She left the children with Carol again, not wanting them in the courtroom for what was about to happen, and drove with James to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed. David was there, his face hard and bitter. Diane and Richard sat behind him, whispering urgently. But there were also reporters, curiosity seekers, and people Sarah didn't recognize. The air crackled with anticipation. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. She reviewed the documents one final time, then looked up at Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, the court has completed its review of your treasure trove claim. No heirs to the Ashford estate have come forward. No legal challenges have been filed within the statutory period. Therefore, this court finds that the discovered property, valued at approximately $312 million, is legally yours, free and clear." She brought the gavel down with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. The courtroom erupted. Sarah sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. James gripped her hand, his voice warm. "Congratulations, Sarah. You did it." Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Security stepped in to hold them back, and James led Sarah out through a side door, shielding her from the chaos. In the quiet of the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall and let the tears come. They were tears of relief, of triumph, of exhaustion, and of grief for everything she had lost and everything she had gained. James gave her a moment, then spoke gently. "What do you want to do first?" Sarah wiped her eyes and straightened. "I want to get my children, and then I want to go home. Home." The word felt strange on her tongue, but she knew where home was. It was the broken mansion on the hill, the place everyone had called worthless, the place that had given her back her life. Over the following weeks, Sarah began the transformation. She hired architects and contractors, not Tom, but professionals who would treat the mansion with the respect it deserved. She worked with historians to preserve the parts of the house that could be saved and rebuild what had been destroyed. The vault was emptied carefully, so its contents cataloged and stored in a secure facility. Some pieces she decided to sell, others she would keep, and still others she donated to museums, particularly items related to the Ashford family's history. The mansion slowly came back to life. The roof was repaired, the windows replaced, the walls stabilized and restored. The rooms that had been charred and broken were rebuilt with care, blending modern safety with historic beauty. Sarah hired artisans to restore the marble fireplaces, the oak staircase, the stained glass windows. And as the mansion transformed, so did Sarah. The weight she had lost came back as healthy strength. The lines of exhaustion faded from her face. She no longer looked like someone barely surviving. She looked like someone who had fought and won. Emma and Lucas thrived. Emma returned to school with confidence, no longer the girl whose mother lived in a ruin. Lucas ran through the halls of the mansion, declaring himself prince of the castle, and Sarah let him, because in a way, he was. The town's attitude shifted from mockery to awe, then to something more complicated. Sarah became a symbol, a story people told about resilience and fortune, but she remained wary. She remembered who had stood by her and who had turned away. Carol from the diner became one of her closest friends. Bill from the hardware store was hired as the property manager. Jennifer Ross, the CPS worker, visited not to inspect, but to apologize, admitting she had underestimated Sarah's strength. David tried to re-enter their lives multiple times, his tone shifting from anger to pleading. He claimed he wanted to be part of the children's future, that he had made mistakes. Sarah listened once, then told him calmly that he had made his choice when he abandoned them. If he wanted a relationship with Emma and Lucas, he would have to earn it, and it would be on their terms, not his. Diane and Richard disappeared from her life entirely, their attempts to claim a piece of her fortune thwarted by James's careful legal work. 6 months after the court ruling, the mansion was complete. Sarah stood on the newly rebuilt porch, looking out over the grounds that had been cleared and landscaped, and felt a sense of peace she had never known. The mansion was beautiful again, but more than that, it was theirs. She had kept her promise. She had turned the ruin into a home, and in doing so, she had turned herself into someone she barely recognized, someone strong, someone unbreakable. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Sarah gathered Emma and Lucas in the grand living room. A fire crackled in the restored fireplace, and they sat together on a new sofa, warm and comfortable. "Do you remember when we first came here?" Sarah asked softly. "When we had nothing but each other?" Emma nodded, her eyes glistening. "I thought we were going to die here." Lucas, now 8, looked up at his mother. "But we didn't. We made it." Sarah pulled them both close. "We did. And we're never going to forget what that felt like. The fear, the hunger, the uncertainty. Because remembering it will help us appreciate what we have now." She had already set up the fund she had promised, a foundation that helped single parents facing eviction. That paid for groceries and rent and gave people a second chance. She visited the recipients personally, looked them in the eyes, and told them she understood. Because she did. She had been there. She had stood on the edge of losing everything, and she had clawed her way back. The mansion became a landmark, written about in magazines and featured on television. People came to see the woman who had bought a ruin for $900 and found a fortune beneath it. But Sarah didn't let the fame define her. She remained grounded, focused on her children, on the foundation, on the life she had built from the ashes of despair. 1 year after the court ruling, Sarah stood in the mansion's library, a room she had designed herself, filled with books and comfortable chairs and windows that overlooked the garden. She held a letter in her hands, one she had found while sorting through the last of the Ashford family documents. It was addressed to whoever finds this, written in the same desperate hand that had penned the other letters. It read, "If you have discovered what we left behind, then you are meant to have it. Our family made mistakes, and those mistakes destroyed us. But perhaps in your hands, these treasures can do what they could not do for us. They can build a future. They can bring hope. Use them wisely. Use them well. And remember that wealth means nothing without purpose." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in a frame on the desk. It would stay there, a reminder of where she had come from and why she had been given this second chance. That night, as she tucked Lucas into bed in his newly decorated room, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mom, are we rich now?" Sarah smiled and brushed the hair from his forehead. "We're safe now. That's what matters." And it was true. The money had changed their circumstances, but it hadn't changed who they were. They were still a family that had survived the impossible. They were still people who understood what it meant to have nothing and fight for everything. As Sarah closed the door to Lucas's room and walked down the grand staircase, she paused at the landing and looked out the window. The grounds were lit softly by lanterns, and in the distance, she could see the stone structure where the vault had been sealed. It was empty now, its treasures removed and claimed, but it had served its purpose. It had saved them. Sarah placed her hand on the cool glass and whispered, "Thank you." And in the silence of the mansion, and surrounded by the beauty she had reclaimed from ruin, Sarah Mitchell finally allowed herself to believe that she was home. The mansion on the hill, once condemned and mocked, now stood as a testament to resilience, to hope, to the truth that even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, miracles can still be found. Sarah had been laughed at, dismissed, told she was foolish and desperate, but she had refused to give up. And in that refusal, she had found not just wealth, but something far more precious. She had found herself. The woman who had walked away from the courthouse with $12 to her name was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had stared down despair and won. And as she climbed into bed that night, listening to the sounds of her children sleeping safely in their rooms, Aunt Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. She had made it. They had all made it. And the journey, as painful as it had been worth every single step. The first night after the court finalized the treasure claim, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at the hotel window at 3 a.m, watching the empty street below, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. $312 million. The number felt like a foreign language, something she could say but not truly understand. Behind her, Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Sarah couldn't quite hear. Lucas lay sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the edge, his breathing deep and peaceful. They didn't fully grasp what had happened yet. To them, Mom had won. They were safe, and that was enough. But Sarah understood that winning was just the beginning. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since the ruling. She had finally turned it off around midnight, but the silence felt almost worse than the chaos. Somewhere out there, people were talking about her, planning, scheming, deciding how to get close to the woman with the fortune. She trusted James to protect her legally, but she didn't know how to protect herself from everything else. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She checked the peephole and saw Carol standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sarah opened the door quietly, careful not to wake the children. Carol stepped inside and handed her one of the cups. "Figured you'd be awake." "I couldn't sleep either." They sat together on the small couch. The only sound the hum of the heating unit and the occasional car passing on the street below. Carol sipped her coffee, then spoke. "My sister called me tonight. Haven't heard from her in 3 years. Suddenly she wants to visit, wants to reconnect. Funny how money makes people remember you exist." Sarah closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." Carol shook her head. "Don't be. I'm telling you so you know you're not alone in this. People are going to come out of the woodwork. Some with good intentions, most without. You're going to have to learn to tell the difference fast." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "How do you tell the difference?" Carol smiled sadly. "Time. Real friends stick around when you have nothing. Everyone else is just visiting." They sat together until dawn broke. 2 women who had learned that survival required more than hope. It required wisdom, caution, and the willingness to walk away from people who only saw you as an opportunity. The first major decision Sarah made with her newfound wealth was one that surprised even James. She wanted to buy the hardware store. Bill had mentioned in passing that he was thinking of retiring, that his arthritis made it hard to stock shelves, and his wife wanted to travel before they got too old. Sarah approached him one afternoon during her shift, her heart pounding with nervousness. "Bill, I want to make you an offer." "For the store?" He looked up from the invoice he was reviewing, his expression skeptical. "You don't need to work here anymore, Sarah. You've got more money than God." "I know, but I want to buy it, not to own it and walk away. I want to turn it into something more. A community resource, free workshops on home repair, discounted materials for low-income families, a place where people like me, people who are barely holding on, can learn how to fix their own problems." Bill set down the invoice slowly. "That's not a business model. That's charity." Sarah met his eyes. "It's both. You've been fair to me when nobody else was. You gave me a job when I was desperate. Let me do something good with what I found." Bill was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We can talk numbers. But on one condition. You keep me on as a consultant. I'm not ready to sit on a porch just yet." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "Deal." The purchase of the hardware store made local headlines, though smaller ones than the treasure discovery. Some people praised her community spirit. Others muttered that it was just a publicity stunt, a way to buy goodwill. And Sarah ignored both sides and focused on the work. She hired 3 new employees, all single parents she had met through the foundation she was building. She renovated the back room into a classroom space and brought in contractors to teach weekend workshops. She established a sliding scale payment system and a scholarship fund for materials. Within months, the hardware store became something more than a business. It became proof that Sarah Mitchell remembered where she came from. But not everyone appreciated her efforts. One afternoon, as Sarah was helping a customer select paint colors, a well-dressed woman entered the store. She introduced herself as Patricia Winters, a journalist from a major newspaper, and asked if Sarah would be willing to do an interview. Sarah had been avoiding the press, declining every request, but something about Patricia's direct manner made her pause. What would the interview be about? Patricia pulled out a notepad. The truth, not the fairy tale everyone's telling. I want to know what it's really like. The fear, the pressure, the people who are crawling out of the woodwork. I want to tell the story behind the headline. Sarah studied her carefully. Why? Because I was a single mother once, Patricia said quietly. I know what it's like to count pennies and pray the car doesn't break down. I got lucky too, not like you, but enough. And I remember how everyone suddenly had an opinion about what I should do with my life. Sarah considered, then nodded. Okay, but not here. Come to the mansion tomorrow. The next day, Patricia arrived with a photographer, and Sarah gave them a tour of the restoration work. Then they walked through rooms where craftsmen were carefully repairing plaster moldings, where electricians were installing modern wiring behind historic walls, where painters were matching colors to old photographs. Patricia took notes constantly, asking questions that went deeper than the surface. How do you sleep at night knowing people are waiting for you to fail? What do you say to your children when they ask why their father wants them now but didn't before? Do you ever wish you just walked away from the mansion that first day? Sarah answered honestly. Some nights I don't sleep. I tell my children the truth, that some people only show up when it's convenient for them. And no, I don't wish I'd walked away, because this mansion gave me back my life. The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, The Woman Who Refused to Break. It was fair, balanced, and deeply personal. Sarah read it alone in her hotel room and cried, not from sadness, but from the relief of being seen as a whole person rather than just a headline. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from single mothers across the country, sharing their own stories of struggle and survival. Many asked for help. Some just wanted Sarah to know she wasn't alone. She read every single letter and tried to respond to as many as she could. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Grace, who lived 2 states away. She wrote about losing her job, facing eviction, and contemplating giving up her daughter to her ex-husband because she couldn't provide for her anymore. Sarah's story had given her hope, she wrote, but hope didn't pay the rent. Sarah called Grace that night. They spoke for over an hour, and by the end of the conversation, Sarah had arranged for the foundation to cover 3 months of Grace's rent and connect her with job training resources. 6 months later, Grace sent a photo of herself and her daughter in their own apartment, both smiling. That photo went on Sarah's desk in the mansion's library, a reminder of why the money mattered. But wealth brought complications Sarah hadn't anticipated. One evening, Emma came home from school with red eyes and a tight jaw. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Emma exploded. "They're saying I think I'm better than everyone now, that I'm stuck up, that I only got into the advanced program because you donated money to the school, which you didn't even do." Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I know it's hard. People don't know how to handle change. They need someone to blame or resent." Emma pulled away, her voice breaking. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be the girl whose mom found a treasure. I just want to be normal." Sarah's heart ached. She had worried about this, about how the money would affect her children's lives. "You are normal, sweetheart. You're the same person you were before. The people who matter will see that." "But what if they don't? What if everyone only sees the money?" "Then they're not worth your time," Sarah said firmly. "You find the people who knew you before and stuck by you. Those are your real friends." Emma wiped her eyes. "There's only one. Jenny. Everyone else disappeared when we moved to the mansion." Sarah made a decision. "Then Jenny is worth 100 fair-weather friends. And you'll find more. Real ones. People who see you, not your address." When she enrolled Emma in a private school the following semester, not because the public school wasn't good enough, but because Emma needed a fresh start somewhere people didn't know her story. It was a hard choice, one that felt like running away. But when Sarah saw Emma smile again, truly smile, she knew it was right. Lucas had his own struggles. One afternoon, Sarah found him crying in his room, clutching a torn drawing. When she asked what happened, he showed her. He had drawn a picture of their family at the mansion, and another boy at school had ripped it up, saying Lucas was a liar, that nobody really lived in a castle. Sarah held her son while he cried, then sat him down. "Listen to me. Some people will always try to tear you down. They'll say mean things because they're hurting inside, or because they don't understand. But you know the truth. And the truth is that you're brave and strong, and you survived something really hard." Lucas looked up at her with wide eyes. "Did you know we'd find the treasure?" Sarah shook her head. "No, baby. I just knew I had to keep trying. That's all any of us can do." The restoration of the mansion took nearly a year. Sarah was involved in every decision, working alongside architects and historians to ensure the work honored the building's past while making it livable for the future. She discovered a passion for design she never knew she had, spending hours poring over fabric samples and paint colors and floor plans. One room in particular became her obsession: the ballroom. It was one of the most damaged areas, the ceiling partially collapsed, the floor warped beyond repair. But Sarah could see what it had been. She could imagine the parties and dances that had once filled this space with life and music. She hired specialists to recreate the ceiling's plasterwork based on old photographs. She had the floor replaced with reclaimed wood that matched the original. She installed a chandelier she found at an estate sale, its crystals catching the light like frozen rain. When the ballroom was finally finished, Sarah stood in the center of the empty space and turned slowly, taking in every detail. The room was magnificent, a perfect blend of historic beauty and modern restoration. She could almost hear the echo of music, the whisper of silk gowns, the laughter of people long dead. Emma found her there, standing alone in the fading afternoon light. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah turned to her daughter and smiled. "I'm more than okay. I'm proud. This room was destroyed, and we brought it back." Emma walked to the center and stood beside her mother. "What are you going to use it for?" Sarah had been thinking about that. Charity events, fundraisers for the foundation, maybe even wedding receptions for couples who can't afford a fancy venue. This room has been empty too long. It deserves to be filled with life again. And so it was. The mansion's first event was a fundraiser for the Single Parent Foundation, and Sarah opened every room to guests who walked through in awe. People who had laughed at the condemned wreck now gasped at its beauty. The transformation was complete and undeniable. David attended that first event, arriving late and leaving early. Sarah saw him from across the ballroom, watched him take in the restoration, the wealth on display, and the evidence of everything he had walked away from. Their eyes met once, and she saw something there that might have been regret. He approached her later, his voice quiet. "It's beautiful. You did an incredible job." "Thank you," Sarah said evenly. "I was wrong," David continued, "about a lot of things. I know it doesn't change anything, but I want you to know I see that now." Sarah studied him for a long moment. The anger she had carried for so long had dulled to something more like pity. "I hope you do. For your sake, not mine." "Can I see them? Emma and Lucas? Not to take them, just to talk?" Sarah considered. "That's up to them. They're old enough to decide if they want you in their lives. But David, if you come back now, you stay. No more leaving when things get hard." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I understand." Whether he meant it, time would tell. But Sarah had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. She had won the war for her children's safety and her own survival. What David did with his second chance was his responsibility, not hers. As the evening wore on and guests mingled beneath the chandelier, Sarah stepped out onto the terrace. The ground stretched before her, lit by lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. In the distance, she could see the stone structure where the vault had been, now converted into a garden folly, its door sealed permanently. Carol joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "You did it. Really, truly did it." Sarah took the glass and smiled. "We did it. I couldn't have survived without you." Carol clinked her glass against Sarah's. To surviving, and to knowing the difference between people who show up and people who just show off. They drank to that. 2 women who had learned that wealth was measured not in money, but in the people who stood beside you when the world tried to knock you down. Inside the ballroom, Emma was dancing with Lucas, both of them laughing, their faces flushed with joy. Sarah watched them through the window and felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Real, lasting peace. The mansion was no longer a ruin. Her family was no longer broken. And Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had been mocked for spending her last $900 on a condemned property, stood on a terrace overlooking grounds that belonged to her in a house that had risen from ashes, and understood finally what the Ashford family's letter had meant, when wealth meant nothing without purpose, and she had found hers. The following spring, Sarah stood in the mansion's garden, watching workers plant the last of the roses she had selected. The garden had been designed to honor the Ashford family, incorporating elements from old photographs while adding new life. It would be open to the public on weekends, free of charge, another way to give back to the community that had watched her rise. A car pulled into the driveway, and Sarah recognized the driver immediately. It was Jennifer Ross, the CPS worker who had filed the report that nearly took her children. Sarah's first instinct was alarm, but Jennifer was smiling as she approached. "I'm not here officially," Jennifer said. "I wanted to see what you'd done with the place, and to apologize, properly, face to face." Sarah gestured toward the garden bench. "Sit with me." They sat together in the spring sunshine, and Jennifer spoke. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen children in terrible situations, and I've made hard calls. But I was wrong about you. I saw the house, the poverty, and I made assumptions. I didn't see your strength." "You were doing your job," Sarah said quietly. "Protecting children. I can't fault you for that." Jennifer shook her head. "I could have looked deeper. Could have seen that your children were loved, fed, safe in the ways that mattered. Instead, I saw surface problems and jumped to conclusions. I'm sorry." Sarah looked out at the garden, at the roses just beginning to bloom. "I used to be angry about it, but that hearing, that moment when I had to fight for my children, it made me realize how strong I actually was. Sometimes we need someone to doubt us before we can prove them wrong." Jennifer smiled. "You certainly proved everyone wrong. This place is incredible." Sarah stood and offered her hand. "Come on. Let me show you the rest." They walked through the mansion together, and Sarah found herself telling stories she hadn't shared with anyone else. About the night she first found the vault and thought she was losing her mind. About the moment the appraiser told her the value and she couldn't breathe. About watching her children sleep in that hotel room, knowing that in 90 days, everything would either be theirs or lost forever. Jennifer listened, and when the tour ended, she hugged Sarah tightly. "Thank you for showing me, and for forgiving me." After she left, Sarah stood alone in the grand entryway and looked up at the restored staircase, at the chandelier she had chosen herself, at the walls that had once been charred and broken. This house had witnessed her transformation from desperate to determined to triumphant. But more than that, it had witnessed her becoming whole. Emma came down the stairs, backpack slung over her shoulder. "I'm going to Jenny's house. We're working on a project." Sarah smiled. "Have fun, sweetheart. Be home by dinner." Emma paused on the bottom step. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on us." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Never. Not ever. After Emma left, Lucas appeared with a soccer ball. "Can we play outside?" Sarah grabbed her shoes. Absolutely. They ran through the garden together, kicking the ball across the perfectly manicured lawn, laughing when it bounced into the rose bushes. Lucas was faster now, growing in ways that amazed her. Soon, he would be taller than her, would need her less, would build his own life. But for now, in this perfect spring afternoon, he was still her little boy, and she was still the mother who had fought heaven and earth to keep him. When the sun began to set, they collapsed on the grass together, breathing hard, smiling at the sky. Lucas turned to her, his face serious. "Mom, are we going to live here forever?" Sarah considered. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe. Would you want to?" He nodded. "I like it here. It feels safe." Safe. That word meant everything. Sarah pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "Then we'll stay as long as it feels that way." As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Sarah and Lucas walked back to the mansion hand in hand. Lights glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked her over. She had survived. They had all survived. And in surviving, they had found something more valuable than any treasure. They had found home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.